Hey everyone, Frost here,
And BBake.
and we are still so hyped about the announcement of Monster Hunter Wilds. Seriously, Wilds already looks incredible.
There are so many new things that we are going to see in Wilds.
So many directions that the game could still take,
And so many ideas that can be explored.
which is exactly what we're going to be discussing. We both have all sorts of ideas of things we want to see or changes we'd like to make. So let's dive right in.
Dive right in? Aw yeah, because the number one thing we want to see back is underwater combat. We loved it back in 3U and we really want to see...
BBake, we don't actually have any ideas about what we want for underwater combat. We just want it back.
Okay, you're right. Underwater combat's a gimme. Many people want to see it return. So, I'll give you a different idea, also taking inspiration from 3U. In recent MH games, we are just handed a companion at the very beginning of the game, no explanation to it whatsoever. For any of you hunters who have not played Monster Hunter Tri or 3 Ultimate, we had 2 companions in that game, Cha-Cha and Kayumba, which we had to earn through means of this story. It wasn't until our HR2 urgent in the village where we had to save Cha-Cha from some Jaggias, and the HR5 urgent in the village where we saved Kayumba from a Durambros, that the 2 of them would join us upon completion of their respective urgent quests. And this is what we want to see for our companions come Monster Hunter Wilds. Take for example the bird mount we see the hunter riding in MH Wilds. Instead of just having this available to us at the beginning of the game, it could make for a much more interesting plot point that we saved this creature from being attacked by, say, the game's flagship monster, and as a result, this creature becomes quite fond of our hunter and begins to follow us around where we could quickly tame it, thereby unlocking ourselves this bird companion to help expedite our journeys throughout the environments. It is a subtle difference, but it really helps establish a deep sense of connection to your companion. And it is the moments of storytelling and character building through these scenarios that can make the companion feel much more memorable and appreciated.
I have a good feeling.
Something I have been wanting to see for a long time now is the introduction of 2 new elements, wind and earth. Now, there are plenty of existing monsters that would fall under these elements already. Kushala Daora immediately comes to mind for wind element, and Paolumu and Ibushi could also be wind monsters. And for earth, Diablos comes to mind first and foremost. There's also the mud monsters and the Morins that would reasonably be earth monsters instead of water. Now, the other side of these elements are their respective blights and the effects they would have on our hunters. Earth Blight is easy. It would reduce your hunter's movement speed, kinda like how running through mud works in World and Rise. I'm thinking that the rank 1 Earth Blight would only shorten your hunter's evade distance, while the rank 2 Earth Blight would do that as well as slow down your hunter's walk speed. To me, that makes the most sense all around. It's realistic, impactful, and interesting. As for Wind Blight, I have 2 different ideas of how this could work. The first idea is a lot more fun in my opinion. My idea was that Wind Blight would increase your knockback reactions. So allow me to demonstrate the 5 levels of knockback. Level 1 is a flinch. Level 2 is getting knocked on your butt. Level 3 is when you're knocked back but catch yourself. Level 4 is when you're launched back and roll on the ground. And finally, level 5 is like when you get smacked by a Stalos and get sent flying. Wind Blight would make a level 1 reaction into a level 2 into a level 3, and so on. That's what the first rank of Wind Blight would do. Then there's the second rank of Wind Blight, which would additionally increase the knock up reaction. And what I mean by knock up reaction is when you get hit by an attack like Diablos when it unburrows from the ground, launching you up instead of back. What the rank 2 Wind Blight would do is change that animation to the animation that happens when you get hit by one of Ibushi's tornadoes. Not only would it cost you more time, but you also wouldn't get the invincibility while you're in the air, making it extra dangerous. So while I like that version of Wind Blight a lot more, it doesn't really make sense how it would work. So, my other iteration of Wind Blight would focus more on the effects of various blights making more realistic sense. It would also involve changing what Ice Blight does, which works fine since the effect of Ice Blight was changed in Rise for the wire bugs, which will obviously not be present in the next MH. So first is Wind Blight, and it would gain the effects of what Ice Blight used to do before Monster Hunter Rise, speeding up stamina consumption. The idea here is that Wind Blight would be like having the wind knocked out of your hunter, making them feel short on breath. But now, we need something new for Ice Blight. My idea is that Ice Blight would gain a new effect where it slows your hunter's attack animations. The idea here is pretty simple. The hunter is cold, which restricts their ability to swing around their arms quickly. Honestly, either of these ideas for Wind Blight would be very cool to see implemented. And while I do respect and appreciate the realism that Monster Hunter usually goes for, I'm personally more fond of the knockback version because it just sounds more fun. Mostly because I just love the animation when you get sent flying after getting smacked by a Stalos. So, while we're talking about elements, I want to go over the next idea I have: elemental damage indicators. I want to see Capcom alter the damage indicators to show elemental damage. The idea here would be to separate raw damage and elemental damage dealt and display them separately. Let's say I do an attack that deals 120 damage. That's all fine and well, but I don't know how much is raw and how much is element. So, let's fix that. What if instead, this hypothetical attack would now be displayed as dealing 100 raw damage and 20 water damage? I like the sound of that. Now, I would also like to see options for what we want displayed. There would be 5 options. Option 1 is what we currently have and would be the default, where it shows the values combined into a single number. Option 2, then, is seeing the raw and elemental damage separately. Option 3 would be displaying the raw damage only. Option 4 would be displaying element damage only. And finally, option 5, where we don't see the damage we're dealing at all. It's a conceptually simple change, though it might be kinda difficult to implement. I don't know. Still, given the changes and additions made in World and Rise, I think it would be a wonderful quality of life improvement over what we have now.
Ever since the introduction of World, camps have made hunting much smoother, but sometimes it feels like it goes a little too far to impact the overall experience. There has been quite some debate for a while now about the use of camps for item and equipment restocking, and we want to remove this. Kind of. Hear me out. We wouldn't want to see restocking go away completely, nor the changing of equipment, but alter them to the point which makes it more realistic while also preserving the experience of potentially running out of healing items, thereby fundamentally changing how you approach a fight. If we take a look at the MH Wilds trailer, we can see that the bird mount appears to have a bowgun on it alongside the greatsword the hunter has on his back. This could suggest the ability to set one weapon aside on reserve while you go out hunting that you could switch between interchangeably. For example, right before you go hunting, you have an equipment slot that you could fill in with one weapon that you bring with on your quest. This would be the only way that you could switch weapons mid-hunt, thereby meaning you no longer have access to your entire equipment box. And without access to your equipment box, then you might be wondering how you access your items. Well, we would also have something like a field pouch that we saw in previous MH titles. You could add, say, like 10 different items into that field pouch, and those would be the only items that you could restock while out on your hunt. And once they're gone, they're gone. We think this is kind of the perfect medium between still having access to other items during your hunt, while also being the implementation that feels the most sensible and realistic.
Alright, moving on to a series of simpler changes, the first of which being a change in how sharpening works. The way sharpening a weapon works right now, under normal circumstances, is that you need to go through the entire sharpening animation in order to gain any effect. Which, on its own, is fine. But the problem comes in when we get interrupted. Let's be real here. This is just plain dumb. Grinding the whetstone on a weapon 3 times, Getting interrupted and making no progress at all is stupid, makes no sense, and I hate it. So, I think it's time for a change in how sharpness and sharpening work. First is my idea of how sharpness would need to work. Essentially, the change will make sharpness actually reflect what is visually represented in a weapon's sharpness gauge. There's a general sharpness gauge, and then there's a weapon's actual sharpness that fits inside of that sharpness gauge to varying amounts. That way, sharpness can be balanced not only for the size of the levels, but the size of the entire gauge overall as well. And now for the real kicker, sharpening. The change should be simple. Instead of specifically requiring 4 swipes to gain any effect, each swipe would now restore a certain amount of sharpness based off of the total gauge. Yep, it's that simple. Now, I did say a certain amount of sharpness. There's a reason for that.
Another idea that we had comes in the form of modifying a few items that were made infinite in 5th gen. There are 2 types of items we had in mind, the first of those being whetstones. So piggybacking off of the sharpening idea just mentioned, there could be 3 different types of whetstones. The basic whetstone would be called the Hunter Stone. It's a special whetstone, every hunter receives them from the guild and carries with them at all times with unlimited use. Each swipe of this would only restore, say, 5% of the total gauge's sharpness. Now that sounds low, but that's intentional. The next kind would be a regular whetstone. We would carry 10 at most, and each swipe restores 15% of the total gauge, and these ones would be the ones that you could purchase at the item shops, like always. And lastly, we have wetfish, which could only be obtained by fishing. No shortcuts. These would restore a massive 25% of the gauge's sharpness with each swipe. The idea here is to create a nice balance between efficiency and accessibility of these items. The Hunter Stone is always available but highly inefficient. Whetstones are moderately efficient and could be bought at stores easily, but it's going to cost both zenny and inventory space. Lastly are the wetfish. They're extremely efficient, but will require you to go out of your way to get them. This will hopefully create a balance, highly rewarding those willing to get some wetfish without severely punishing those that don't take the time to do so. Now the other type of item, which would be pickaxes. This one is simple. Your regular pickaxe with unlimited usage would work like it does in World, where you just pick at the mining node 3 times, each pick yielding 1 drop. Then you have the mega pickaxe, where using one of these on a mining node makes you mine like in Rise. 1 pick, you get all the drops. Nice. Again, it's just another situation of balance, where players can have the option to enjoy the more modern version of gathering that we see in Rise, or they can enjoy the older versions where we gather individually. It's all up to your own tastes. And speaking of taste, the next idea is a quick one about healing items. We want to see a slight rework based off of the Rise Sunbreak version. Currently, whenever we drink a potion or a mega potion, we get a slight burst of healing at the very beginning before getting the rest of the health over a few seconds. Essentially, we just want this reversed. Rather than getting the burst of healing in the beginning, you get that burst of healing at the end. Why do we want this, you might ask? Well, healing feels a bit too strong in Rise and Sunbreak, and this would be a way to balance how fast you're able to heal, but also, it's just more logical. Think about it. Given a potion is supposed to be a medicinal healing consumable, it only makes sense that the more dosage of a potion you ingest, the greater healing you receive, and thereby, having the burst of healing at the end would represent this idea better. But yeah, that's about it.
Alright, on to the next idea. So, if I'm being honest, I'm not too fond of the modern armor skill system in World and Rise. For one reason or another, I like the old system a lot more. As you might expect, then, my next idea is about armor skill systems. What makes the modern system so good is that no matter how many points you have in an armor skill, you will still gain some sort of benefit from it. The old system was not so generous. You needed to reach a point threshold in order to gain any sort of benefit, which made it somewhat difficult to get armor skills and fairly unfriendly for newcomers. But hear me out on this. What if every point in the old system did grant us a benefit? That's largely where I'm going with my idea, to make a new armor skill system. This new system I have in mind would look similar to the old system, where we deal with points instead of levels. This time, however, every single point in an armor skill would provide some benefit. So, using attack boost as an example, each point you have an attack boost would give you +1 attack. It's pretty straightforward. Also, this would allow for negative skills to come back as well. So, if you have -1 points of attack boost, you would then lose 1 attack. And that's the other benefit of this system. I believe that the return of negative skills needs to happen in order to combat the current system's egregious skill bloat. But that's not all. There would also still be thresholds that provide additional bonuses when met. The original system always used thresholds of 10, 15, and 20. And 25 and for you. But that's too rigid. I think it would be more fun if different skills would have different thresholds. So, using attack boost as an example again, I would put thresholds at 4, 8, 12, 16, and 20 points. And at each respective rank, you would gain 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10% additional attack. Now, these are just arbitrary numbers. The whole purpose of this system is to use the thresholds to incentivize getting many points in a particular skill, with the benefit that even if thresholds are not met in a given skill, you would still gain some sort of benefit. To me, it feels like this system would strike a happy medium between the old armor skill system and the new one.
And speaking of armor skills, that perfectly segues into our next idea. Layered armor. Layered armor seems to be a favorite amongst many hunters, allowing them to customize their hunter's appearance while still maintaining a set with desirable skills. However, the methods of which we obtain layered armor has always been somewhat questionable. In Iceborne, you need to go to the Guiding Lands and get a few special materials for it. In Sunbreak, you needed to get a couple outfit vouchers and then spend some normal monster materials to unlock the layered pieces. While there is certainly nothing wrong with this, per se, we think there's a better method. One of the main experiences and aspects to Monster Hunter is hunting monsters, so you can craft their associated equipment to fight other monsters with. This has been an integral part of the game from the very beginning, and a lot of this experience has been taken away by the ability to craft layered armor and weapons in such reduced time as compared to actually crafting the monster's armor set or weapon. So where am I going with this? Well, layered equipment has become such an integral part of the game that I think it has come to the point where layered armor shouldn't even have its own crafting requirements. Let me explain. Say I just spent the past 3 quests fighting Malzeno so I could get the materials to craft his waist armor. Well, once I crafted that waist armor, not only would I unlock the piece of equipment with the associated stats, but I would also unlock the layered piece for this waist simultaneously. Having both unlock at the same time feels like a happy medium between staying true to the Monster Hunter experience, while also making layered armor still feel rather accessible. But you'll have to let us know what you think on this one.
Alright, here we are at our final idea, and you already know we saved the best one for last. At least, the best in our opinion. This is something that seemed so obvious that it's a wonder that it hasn't already been added in Monster Hunter. This last idea is all about hunting knives. We've seen our hunters with hunting knives all throughout Monster Hunter. From the very beginning, our hunters have used them to carve monsters. Then, in MH4, we started using them for combat too, from slashing with them while climbing on walls, to stabbing monsters with them while mounting. And while we don't necessarily see them all the time, they're still always there, a part of us. So let's bring them front and center. This idea has many layers to it. First and foremost, it's meant to add an optional visual component to our hunters. I'm sure you've noticed that some of the armors have little knives or swords of varying shapes and sizes on them, usually at the back or sides of the hunter's waist. Then in World, almost every single armor set has a knife. So, what this system would do is put these knives on our hunters like in World, but allow us to change the appearance of the knives. So, for example, I could use Rathalos' armor, but have a Velkhana knife or Nargacuga knife on my back. Or no knife at all if we'd rather not see it. But beyond cosmetics, these knives would be functional too. Hunting knives would have their own separate equipment slot on our hunters. I picture it as a slot beneath talismans, kinda like the petal aces in Rise. At the start of the game, we would automatically have a simple iron hunting knife. As you progress through the game, you would unlock more knives by hunting monsters that you could then craft by using their parts. Now, not only would different knives obviously have different designs, but they would have different stats too. I was thinking that hunting knives could have similar stats to Palika weapons from GU. An attack value, an element or status value, a sharpness level, an affinity value, and varying amount of slots. While the knives are mostly meant to be cosmetic, we figured it would be a cool idea to give them different stats since they're directly used for mounting monsters. A stronger knife could do 5 damage per stab instead of always just doing 1 damage. That would basically be the only meaningful use for the stats of the knives anyway. I mean, you could slash around with them if you wanted to, but they'd never be more effective than using your actual weapon. Now, there's another side to this idea, and bear with me here. Paid DLC. Yeah, okay, look. I know we're all sick of paid DLC, but this is exactly why the knives would be a huge benefit. The sad truth is that paid DLC is probably here to stay, and we're just gonna have to deal with it. And these knives? They'd basically be no different from weapon pendants in World. And let's be real, I think we'd all prefer it if we didn't get more paid DLC armors and weapons, which is exactly why we need things like these hunting knives, so Capcom keeps that disgusting paid DLC away from our beloved armors and weapons. Alright, that's all I've got to say about that idea.
We think it has a lot of potential to be a really cool idea.
And that wraps up our various wild ideas of things we'd like to see in Monster Hunter Wilds.
And if you have any ideas of your own you'd like to share, let us hear them in the comments.
And remember, be cool, stay frosty.
Toodles!